Wyatt's rebellion was a popular uprising in England in 1554, named after Thomas Wyatt, one of its leaders. The rebellion arose out of concern over Queen Mary I's determination to marry Philip of Spain, which was an unpopular policy with the English. Queen Mary's overthrow was implied in the rebellion, although not expressly stated as a goal. Motives. The precise reason for the uprisings has been subject to much debate. Many historians, such as D.M. Lodes, consider the rebellion to have been primarily motivated by political considerations, not easily separated from religious ones in the 16th century, and notably the desire to prevent the unpopular marriage of Queen Mary I to Prince Philip of Spain. On 16 November 1553 a parliamentary delegation had waited upon the Queen, and formally requested that she choose an English husband. The obvious though tacit candidate being her kinsman Edward Courtenay, recently created Earl of Devon. The rebels explained that the reason for the rebellion was to prevent us from overrunning by strangers. Nevertheless, all the rebel leaders were committed Protestants. However, the Crown at Wyatt's trial acquitted him of any intention to actually harm the Queen. Initial plans. There were 4 chief rebel leaders. Sir Thomas Wyatt, who owned large areas of land in Kent and had great influence there. Sir James Croft, who came from an influential Herefordshire family. Sir Peter Carew, who was an MP for Devon. Henry Grey, 1st Duke of Suffolk, who was based in Leicestershire. Other rebels, aside from Edward Courtenay, Earl of Devon, included Sir Henry Isley, Lord John Grey of Wilton, Lord Thomas Grey, Sir William Thomas, Sir Nicholas Throckmorton, John Harrington, 1st Baron Harrington of Exton, Sir Nicholas Arnold and Sir William St. Lo. Others involved included the French ambassador, Antoine de Noailles, who knew that a Spanish king on the throne of England was not in the best interests of France, and the mathematician Leonard Diggers. Each of the 4 leaders would raise rebellions in one of the 4 counties, and together they would converge on London, on the 18th of March 1554. They would then replace Mary with her half-sister Elizabeth, who would then marry Lord Devon. Meanwhile, a fleet of French ships would prevent Philip of Spain from reaching England. Implementation of these plans was prevented when Simon Renard, the Holy Roman Empire's ambassador to England, suspected a plot. He informed the Lord Chancellor, Bishop Stephen Gardiner, who on the 21st of January arrested Devon, who revealed that there was indeed a rebellion planned. Under increased pressure of time, the planned rebellion was moved forward and went awry. The following day Sir James Croft delivered a message to Elizabeth at Ashridge House in Hertfordshire, but realizing that under the circumstances a rebellion would be unsafe, Croft gave up. Grey proved more determined, but only managed to raise a force of 140 rebels, many of whom were his own men. He was refused entry to Coventry, and gave himself up. He was later tried and beheaded, as were his daughter Lady Jane Grey, and her husband Lord Guilford Dudley, both still in prison since the failed attempt to put Lady Jane on the throne, and neither of whom were involved in the uprising. News that Sir Peter Carew was spreading dissent at Exeter in Devon by saying publicly that a Spanish king would bring the Spanish Inquisition reached the court in January 1554. Carew attempted to raise support for the uprising in Devon, but the Protestant nobles there proved unwilling to commit treason, and the county's peasant inhabitants were largely Catholic. Also, he had played a large part in crushing the earlier Prayer Book rebellion there. A warrant was issued for Carew's arrest, but, forewarned, he escaped across the Channel to Normandy, but was arrested soon after. By this time, the French ships found themselves unable to maintain the position and returned to France. Only Wyatt succeeded in raising a substantial force. On the 22nd of January 1554 he summoned a meeting of his friends at his castle of Allington, and the 25th of January was now fixed for the rising rebellion. On the 26th of January Wyatt occupied Rochester, and issued a proclamation to the county, Many country people and local gentry collected. At first the Queen's supporters, led by Lord Abergavenny and Sir Robert Southwell, the sheriff, appeared to be able to suppress the rising with ease, routing a rebel force of 500 at Hartley Wood on the 28th of January. But the Spanish marriage was unpopular, and Kent was more affected by the preaching of the reformers than most of the country districts of England. Abergavenny and Southwell were deserted by their men, who either disbanded or went over to Wyatt. He now had 3,000 men at his command. A detachment of the London train bands was sent against him under the command of the elderly Duke of Norfolk. But they also joined the rebels, raising their numbers to 4,000, while the Duke fled to London. Elizabeth, meanwhile, had been summoned to court and was held incommunicada, in mortal fear. The rising now seemed so formidable that the Queen and Council sent a deputation to Wyatt to ask for his terms. He demanded that the Tower of London should be surrendered to him, and the Queen put under his charge. The insolence of these demands turned an initially sympathetic London against Wyatt, and Mary was able to rally the capital to her cause on the 1st of February by delivering a rousing speech at the Guildhall. Wyatt's army reached Southwark on the 3rd of February. Mary's supporters occupied London Bridge in force, and the rebels were unable to penetrate into the city. Wyatt was driven from Southwark by the threats of Sir John Bridges, afterwards Lord Chandos, who was prepared to fire on the suburb with the guns of the Tower. Refusing to give up, the rebels marched to Kingston. The bridge there was also destroyed, but the rebels repaired it and crossed over. They met little resistance as they marched through the outskirts of London, but were stopped by the inhabitants of Ludgate. The rebel army then broke up. Aftermath: Wyatt surrendered, and was tried and executed along with approximately 90 rebels, many of whom were hanged, drawn and quartered. Wyatt himself, after being severely tortured in the hope of extracting a confession implicating Elizabeth, was beheaded at Tower Hill and his body quartered. Courtenay was exiled and eventually died in Padua. Lord Thomas Grey and William Thomas were both executed. Throckmorton was found not guilty and released. Sir Nicholas Arnold, together with a few other ringleaders, was never brought to trial and eventually pardoned. Sir Peter Carew was imprisoned but released, and Sir James Croft was tried and found guilty, but eventually pardoned. William St. Lo also evaded punishment. Elizabeth was intensely interrogated and in danger of execution, but managed to be spared due to evasive and intelligent responses, in which she maintained she had been unaware of the planned uprising. Nothing could be proved, but the degree to which she was privy to the preparations has been questioned by modern scholars. Elizabeth remained imprisoned as a precautionary measure. The rebellion proved disastrous for the Wyatt family, as they lost their title and lands, including the family home, Allington Castle. However, when Elizabeth, herself a Protestant and distant relative of the Wyatt family, ascended the throne in 1558, she restored the family titles and lands.